Welcome to episode 3 of SAC Presents. I'm Melissa James, and this is my sous chef, Lola Beth.
Hello.
And with the holidays right around the corner, we decided that we would share one of our family's favorite recipes. And that's at holidays or really any time of the year. And that's ice sugar cookies. They're pretty simple to make. Many of the ingredients you can make ahead of time. They're great for any age. Anybody can participate in making them. And it's just a lot of fun for us, for our friends, and they're great teacher gifts and family things that you can bring to family gatherings as the holidays approach. So we hope you enjoy cooking with us. We will send the recipe out after the presentation. Thank you for joining us, and we hope that our family recipe brings a little bit of joy and sweetness to your family's holiday traditions. Step 1,
Cookie dough.
So our best tip for making cookie dough is that once you make the dough, wrap it tightly in saran wrap or place it in a gallon Ziploc bag and put it in the fridge overnight. So cookie dough is always a step that we do the night before we're going to be making cookies. This helps not only keep it from sticking as you're rolling it out, but cold cookie dough is the secret to not having your cookies spread when you put them in the oven. If you've ever spent a ton of time cutting out cookies for Christmas, put them on the baking pan, and when you took them out, your candy cane looked nothing like a candy cane, try it with cold dough next time. It keeps its shape and it makes your cookies a lot more crisp in their shape and form. So that's the best tip we have for cookies. Okay, so first we're going to mix together our butter and sugar until they're creamy. So we already have it measured out, and it's 1 cup of unsalted butter at room temperature, which is 2 sticks of butter. Perfect. And 1 cup of sugar. All right. And we're going to mix that together. You'll notice we have a paddle mixer. And so because this dough is going to get pretty thick, we use the paddle mixer. And I love this one from KitchenAid that actually has the scraper on the side because it helps make sure all the ingredients get mixed in there good. So next, we're going to mix in our egg, vanilla, and almond extract. So that's 1 egg at room temperature. Then we've got half a tablespoon of vanilla. It recommends clear, but honestly, it's cookie. You can't really tell, and you're going to ice it anyway. And then half a teaspoon of almond extract. And then we're going to shut the mixer and mix that until it's all good and mixed up together.
1.
Next, we're going to add our flour and our baking powder. So we have 3 cups of flour and 2 teaspoons of baking powder. And my tip for the flour to have fluffy cookies is I always use Swan's Down cake flour. It is already sifted. It has a great airy texture. Gives you perfect cookies every time. So add the baking soda or baking powder, sorry. All right. And now we're going to mix that on low until it's all mixed together and forms our dough ball. So once your dough is mixed up, you'll form it into a ball, pull it out of your mixer. And like I said, you can use saran wrap, or we just use a Ziploc bag Push all the air out and zip it up. And then we'll put this in the fridge overnight. And tomorrow we'll get to rolling out and we'll continue our video. So now that we've made our cookie dough, you can do it the same night, different night, but step number 2 is
Icing.
icing. So this recipe will make a large quantity of icing. Except for maybe Christmas, I have never made a full recipe's worth of icing. So feel free to half it, to quarter it, to whatever suits your need and the number of cookies that you need to do. Also, this is fine to make in advance and it saves. The icing is good for probably a week to 2 weeks as long as you keep it sealed. So that there's no problem with you making this in advance, especially if you're going to be doing a lot of cookies or maybe even having like a cookie decorating party for your friends or family. So with that, let's get started. The first ingredient is warm water. For a full recipe, you need 3/4 of a cup of warm water. Next step is meringue powder. A full recipe calls for 5 tablespoons of meringue powder. So you'll dump that in, and then we need to mix this up. So you're going to close the mixer, put it on high, and mix it until everything gets slightly foamy. So once you have your meringue powder and water mixed until slightly foamy, you're going to add 1 teaspoon of cream of tartar, and that's for a full recipe. So you'll add that and mix that in really well. The next step is we're going to add 9 3/4 cups of sifted powdered sugar. Now again, this is for a full recipe. For our recipe today, we're only making a half recipe. So what you see here is actually a little less than 5 cups of powdered sugar. Add it all. You know, if you get a little, that's the great thing about powdered sugar. It cleans up really easy. All right, and now you're gonna add a paddle attachment, the same kind of attachment that we used for our cookie dough, and you're gonna put it on the lowest setting for 10 minutes. We'll be back in 10 minutes.
1 eternity later.
All right, so we're back. We've let this mix for 10 minutes on low. We also added in vanilla extract and almond extract. To make a full recipe, it's 1/2 teaspoon of almond extract and 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. So you add those and then you mix it again for an additional 2 minutes. Now, as you can tell, it's pretty thick. So that's fine. We'll have to thin it out. We'll actually thin it out twice. But this is where you have some decisions to make. Whether if you're going to do all of your icing in one color, you can go ahead and color it now and then thin it out. If you need multiple colors, say you're doing Christmas and so you want red and you want green and white and blue, then go ahead and this is the point where you will divide it out before you color it and thin it. Okay? For us, we're going to go ahead and do it all one color because we're doing pumpkins. So we're going to add orange food coloring. One tip here, if you have the option or if you haven't purchased your food coloring and you go to do this, is try to always use gel food coloring. The reason is that it distributes better in the icing and it also gives you bolder color. So if you want brighter, bolder colors, gel food coloring is how you get that. All right. So we're going to add that in, let it mix a little bit longer, and we'll be right back with you. All right, so we have our icing colored, we have our orange. The next step is to thin it out. This is a royal icing recipe, so the goal is that when we're done and we decorate the cookies, the icing is going to set up nice and firm. It'll dry so you can stack the cookies, you can do cookie bouquets with the cookies, but it will be a firm, nice iced cookie when we're done. In order to do that, you'll need to make 2 versions of every color frosting you make. The first will be a detail frosting, And this is going to be a frosting that you'll use to do outlines of your spaces, to define your space and the details of your cookie. This is a thicker icing. Think of it kind of like the outline in a coloring book. The black lines, that is the same kind of thing you're going to do with your detail icing. The next will be a flood icing. That's a lot thinner icing that you will add in. It'll kind of float itself out. It'll level itself out, and it will fill in the spaces where you have created those boundaries and outlines. This is what gives you nice, crisp details. It's a little tedious, but very easy. Looks like you put a lot of time into it, but it really doesn't take a lot of time. One thing I will caution you with, we've already dyed all of our icing. So as we thin it, we know nothing else is going into it to thin it even further. If you are waiting to dye your icing because you're doing multiple colors, just keep in mind as we're thinning that when you add your coloring, it's gonna get a little bit thinner. So you may want to, at this point, divide it out into, however many divisions you need for ever many colors you need, and then dye it and then thin it in smaller batches. So to thin it, we're just gonna add water. We're gonna add a little bit at a time, mixing as we go. The goal for this first icing, the detail icing, and the check, if we've got it right, will be after we add a little bit of water, let it mix out. I'll take a spoonful of icing, drip it back down across what's in the bowl, and I'm waiting for it to take about 25 seconds for the bead of icing I put down to disappear. About 25 seconds, you know it's the right consistency for detail icing. So we've got everything thinned out. It's taking about 25 seconds for the line to disappear. And so we're ready to save out some of this icing for the details. Now, what I do is I use these. You can get them at Hobby Lobby or Michael's in the baking section. But honestly, if you can find them, same thing, but a lot cheaper. It's just a ketchup or mustard dispenser that they sell at the dollar store, or sometimes they have them in the Target one spot, depending on time of year. What we're gonna do is just spoonful by spoonful, fill this up with icing. And then this will be the same, we'll store it in this. We'll also apply it to the cookie or decorate with this. So you can fill these up as many as you need for the number of colors you have or the number of people you have that are going to be decorating. But go ahead, pull out what you need of your detail frosting, and then we're going to take the same step, adding water, mixing, until we get it to where that line disappears in about 10-15 seconds. When it only takes about 10 or 15 seconds, then you've got your flood icing, and you'll do the same thing. Save it out. Tips or things to keep in mind: if you're making this ahead and you're going to store it for a day or even a couple of days, it will, even though it'll be sealed, it will firm up just a tad. So if you're just a little under or a little off that mark, that's fine. It'll fix itself. Don't worry about it. If you're pretty far off that mark, particularly like if you added just a little bit too much water for your detail icing, just add a little bit more powdered sugar back in it, mix it up, it'll thicken it right back up. Just make sure that you go small increments, whether you're adding back powdered sugar or adding water in the first place to thin it, and you should get it right. So 25 seconds for the line to disappear with your detail icing, 10 to 15 for your flood icing. Let me get my detail icing out, mix it up and get my flood icing, and we'll be right back with you. All right, so now I have my thicker detail icing, my thinner flood icing. As I said, we made about a half a batch of the icing, and I could probably fill up about 5 of these to give you an idea of how much half a batch makes. And I can tell you, when we do Christmas cookies, we make typically 2 recipes, sometimes 3 worth of the cookie dough, and we would never use more than in total, probably 2 of these. Total, like all the colors combined. So makes a lot of icing. Think about that as you're making it. To keep this fresh, I usually don't have saran wrap around the house because I don't like it. I prefer Ziploc bags. So I took just a small Ziploc bag. I put it over the top, screw my lid on, and this is how I store it. You don't have to put it in the fridge. There's nothing in it that will require it to be refrigerated. So you can put it in the fridge, or you can just leave it on the counter if you want to. But this will be good for about a week. It may start to separate. The water and the food coloring may start to separate. So before you use it, you may have to shake it up to remix it. If it gets a little too thick, add a couple drops of water from the sink, shake it up, you'll be good to go. One tip I will give you when I'm doing, like having my daughter decorate cookies or having her friends or family members over to decorate cookies, kids aren't going to do detail icing and flood icing. It's just not going to happen. So what I typically do for them is actually make one icing that's in between the two, that basically, so it's not so runny that without an edge it makes a huge mess. You know, I don't want it to make a huge mess running off the cookie, but it's also not so thick that they can't very easily spread it on the cookie and they don't get frustrated. So if you're having kids over, if you're letting kids decorate and it's just about the fun and not needing all of the detail, just go with a hybrid in the middle. It'll work fine. For tomorrow, we're going to show you both of these. So that's it for tonight. Tomorrow we will cut out the cookies and get to decorating. So we'll see you then. Now, once you've got your cookie dough made and you've chilled it, whether that's a couple of hours or overnight, you're ready for the next step.
3. Rolling and cutting out your cookie dough.
Perfect. So you've all, I'm sure, rolled out cookie dough. You know, sprinkle a little bit of flour on it when you roll it out. Because this has been in the fridge, it will be pretty firm at first, but once you work with it a little, it'll be a lot easier to roll out. You do want it to stay chilled again, so once you cut it, it keeps its form. So we won't go through all of the rolling out and cutting process because I'm sure that you've done that before, but we will give you one tip at this point. So one of the keys to making good cookies is to make sure that you have consistency in the thickness of your cookies. It helps them to cook evenly, and presentation is just a lot better. So you have 2 options. One is you can find a cookie or a rolling pin like this that allows you can change out these discs to determine what thickness you want your cookie. And so you can use one of these. It makes sure that as you push down, you've got a consistent thickness that it's rolling your cookie dough out to. If you don't want to get a rolling pin like that, or if you've got multiple kids that are going to be cutting out cookies or multiple family members working together, another trick is if you'll lay out some parchment paper with your flour, grab another piece of parchment paper and place it on top, you can actually go to Home Depot or Lowe's and buy paint stirrers. If you'll put 2 paint stirrers on either side and use it as a guide for your traditional rolling pin, that will also help you get a good level thickness on your cookies. Now, one thing that I said earlier is that you can use this cookie recipe to make cookie bouquets. As I said, about 1/4 of an inch or 2 paint sticks thick is about how thick you want to make your traditional cookie. However, if you make it a little bit thicker, maybe add a 3rd paintbrush or paint stirrer to that thickness, you can actually take a cake pop stick or a wooden popsicle stick, stick it in the cookie after you've cut it and before you bake it, and you can turn those cookies into cookie pops. So great idea, make a cookie bouquet out of it, or just give it to someone like that. So lots of different fun things that you can do, but it all starts right here with evenly rolling out your cookies before you cut them. So we're gonna roll out our cookies, and we'll see you in a few minutes.
Phew, that was hard work.
All right, so as you can see, we've started on the icing. I use the thicker icing to do the outlines, and then we'll do the flood icing in the middle. So I'm gonna try my best to film and do this at the same time. But we've got our thicker icing. Start by just doing an outline around the outside. If you were doing multiple colors, you just do one color at a time. So like say I wanted a brown stem, you do pick a color to start with and then do the others. Do your details. Whoop. So if something doesn't quite connect, that's all right. You can go back and connect it, or you can use a toothpick and even it out. Very simple. The more you practice, the easier it'll be, and the more details you can do. So now Lola, you can see, is decorating with the thinner icing. This is the flood icing. It's a little thin for what she's doing, which is why I recommend, especially if you're going to have kids decorating the cookies, just use kind of an in-between. That way it's not so thin that it's going to run off, but it's not so thick that they can't squeeze it out and that they have a hard time covering the cookie. So my tip for really adults or kids alike when you're icing the cookies is take your cookie rack and put it inside a cookie sheet. This will catch all the excess sprinkles and icing that flow off the edge of the cookie. Cleanup is super easy with just a little bit of water. And our last tip is that sprinkles, well, they can cover up a number of issues. So enjoy, have fun, decorate as you want. I'm going to finish putting the flood icing on these that I did outlines on, and I'll show you the finished product.